It often begins quietly, almost invisibly. You're a child, maybe 6 or 7, looking into the eyes of someone who was supposed to be your anchor, but instead, they're collapsing in front of you. Maybe it's rage, maybe addiction, or maybe the empty stare of a person too wounded to care. And in that tiny moment, something ancient wakes up inside your young mind. If I don't hold everything together, no one will. That's how children vanish, not from the world, but from themselves. They smile when they're hurting. They become careful, observant, responsible far too early. People praise them, but no one asks, what did it cost? And trust me, this is only the beginning. Keep going. You learn early that emotions must be controlled like fragile glass. You become the watcher, the one who notices every shift in tone, every slam of a door, every sigh that hints at danger. You grow into the unofficial peacekeeper, the kid who knows exactly when to speak and when to disappear. Psychologists call this parentification, but to a child, it just feels like duty, like survival. You become the airbag in every emotional collision happening around you. On the outside, mature, responsible, old soul. On the inside, a child who never had permission to be a child. And if any of this sounds familiar, wait until you see what happens next. When you're forced to manage grown-up emotions before you even learn multiplication, your mind adapts. It becomes hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant. You scan faces the way a soldier scans a battlefield. You adjust yourself constantly, believing that one mistake can trigger chaos. Your needs shrink. Their needs become everything. You become invisible by becoming perfect. But this perfection isn't confidence. It's survival camouflaged as competence. You smile to keep the peace. You say, I'm fine, because honesty feels dangerous. You don't know it yet, but you're building a version of yourself designed to keep you safe, not happy. And that version, you'll carry it well into adulthood. Unless you interrupt the cycle. As you get older, the emotional cost doesn't fade. It mutates. You grow into someone who handles everything alone, not because you want to, but because you learned that relying on people is risky. You may reject help, shut people out, or feel uneasy whenever life gets too calm. Joy feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. Love feels like a debt you owe. You spend your life in a constant state of readiness, waiting for the next emotional storm. And worst of all, you think this is normal, because chaos wasn't the exception in childhood. It was the atmosphere you breathed. But there's a reason your mind adapted this way, and it goes deeper. Why does a child take on responsibilities no child should ever carry? It's not a choice. It's survival rooted in biology. Children will sacrifice anything, even their identity, to maintain connection. Attachment is oxygen, and if securing it requires abandoning your own needs, you do it without hesitation. Your instincts weren't wrong. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew. But here's the tragedy. What saved you back then traps you now. You grow into an adult who is capable, reliable, strong, yet emotionally starved. A grown body carrying the wounds of a forgotten child. And that child? They're still inside you, waiting to be acknowledged. Keep listening. As an adult, your inner child doesn't disappear. They simply learn how to hide behind competence. You overachieve to feel valuable. You become the dependable one because asking for help feels dangerous. You stay silent because expressing your truth once caused emotional backlash. You become the healer in every relationship, the fixer in every crisis, the calm in every storm. But deep down, you secretly wish someone would finally ask, "Are you okay?" You fantasize about someone noticing that you're exhausted from being strong. These behaviors aren't personality traits. They're survival habits, and their roots go far deeper than you think. Stay with me. Healing begins with something simple, but incredibly difficult. Witnessing. Acknowledging what those years cost you. You've probably told yourself things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "Other people had it worse," or "I turned out fine." But fine is just emotional armor. Fine is the mask you learn to wear. To heal, you must allow the truth to surface. You carried responsibilities that weren't yours. You held emotions that weren't meant for you. You were a child, forced into roles you never agreed to. And that truth? It's not self-pity. It's the doorway to freedom. But stepping through it requires courage, more than you realize. Children who grew up too fast become adults who never feel fully safe. Even peaceful rooms feel suspicious. You flinch at softness, question kindness, and shrink from care. Because somewhere deep inside, vulnerability still feels dangerous. You apologize for crying. You downplay your needs. You confuse exhaustion with success. These patterns aren't flaws, they're echoes of your past. Echoes of a child who never had room to fall apart. But that child didn't vanish. They've been waiting for you, and acknowledging them is the beginning of a new way of living. Ready for the next layer? Think back to the moments you were supposed to be protected, but ended up protecting others. Those birthdays no one celebrated. The emotions you swallowed so the adults around you wouldn't break more. The softness you never got to experience. Even peaceful rooms. These patterns aren't flaws. To heal, you must grieve what you didn't receive, the safety you should have had, the laughter that should have been effortless, the comfort that never came. Grief isn't weakness, it's release. It's your heart finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. And once that door opens, something powerful begins to shift. These childhood patterns reveal themselves in adulthood in subtle but painful ways. You become the emotional anchor in every friendship, the person who listens deeply but rarely shares. You overfunction in relationships, managing, fixing, over-explaining, while quietly resenting how little you receive. Saying no feels like betrayal. Setting boundaries feels like punishment. Letting people care for you feels unnatural. These aren't personality traits. They're leftover strategies from a life where your safety depended on compliance and competence. But here's the good news. Everything learned can be unlearned. Everything conditioned can be rewired. Everything suppressed can be reclaimed. Healing requires asking your inner child a question they've been waiting decades to hear. What did you need that no one gave you? You may hear quiet answers at first. I needed comfort. I needed someone to ask about my feelings. I needed to be allowed to rest. These needs weren't unreasonable. They were human. And slowly, Gently, you begin giving those things to yourself. Not to erase the past, but to stop reliving it. And this is where real transformation begins. As you reconnect with your inner child, the world starts to feel different. Not immediately easier, but more honest. You stop chasing parent figures in romantic relationships. You stop mistaking fear for intuition. You stop abandoning yourself for the approval of others. Carl Jung once said people will do anything to avoid meeting their own soul. But shadow work requires exactly that. Meeting yourself fully. The frightened parts, the ashamed parts, the wounded parts. And instead of running, you turn toward them. This is where wholeness begins. If you grew up too fast, understand this. Your maturity was never the problem. The problem was that you had no alternative. But now, you do. You can choose rest without guilt. You can choose softness without fear. You can choose to stop carrying emotional loads that were never meant for you. There will be days you feel like a small child again. Good. It means something inside you is thawing. That child you left behind is finding their way home. And you're finally learning what real safety feels like. Not fear-driven, but truth-driven. Healing doesn't erase what happened, but it transforms what it made you believe about yourself. You start realizing you're not a burden. You're not too much. You're not responsible for saving anyone anymore. You begin building a life where your emotions matter, your rest matters, your boundaries matter. You begin living from authenticity instead of survival. Your childhood may have been stolen, but your future is still yours to shape. You are not broken. You're rebuilding, not into someone new, but into who you always were beneath the armor. And the final truth lands quietly, but powerfully. You didn't get the childhood you deserved, but you still have a future you can rewrite. And this time, you aren't doing it from fear. You're doing it from awareness, compassion, and truth. The child you once were never needed to be stronger. They needed safety. They needed comfort. They needed someone to say, "You don't have to hold the world together." Now, you get to be that person. Now you get to be that person. You get to rewrite the story. You get to build a life where you're not surviving, you're living. And this journey, it's just beginning. Keep going.